What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I am Darrick McGhee, pastor of the Bible-based church. Thank you so much for being a part of another episode of Conversations with the Covenant Brothers. Such a blessing to be amongst each of you tonight. Looking forward to our discussion that we're going to have. Soon I'm going to bring on my covenant brothers and give them their own individual introduction. Before we get there, I want to make you aware of tonight's conversation. Tonight we're talking about successorship. Is it possible to successfully transition from the pulpit? I look forward to this conversation because depending upon your denominational background, it looks different. If you're in the predominantly black church, it looks different from predominantly white congregational churches. There are some who've never thought about succession. There are others who have it in place. We want to have an open and honest conversation. I want to remind you that our chats are live, and so you are welcome to provide comment. We're live on LinkedIn. We're live on 2 YouTube platforms, and we're live on each of our Facebook pages, as well as the Bible-based church's Facebook page as well. And so you are invited to be a part of our live stream conversation in that regard. We always proof your comments before we post your comments, so please be appropriate in what you're going to say in the comments. But we welcome you to be a part of this discussion. I would ask if you would be willing to share this link with others and encourage them to listen in and to be a part of our conversation. We're 5 covenant brothers. We are real brothers. We have real conversations. You have a chance to be exposed to what we talk about daily through text, through phone call, and even in our fellowship. So I'm excited about that. Allow me, if you will, to begin to bring in each of my covenant brothers one by one and give them their own individual introduction. So let me first bring in my dear brother, the Reverend Dr. Bernard E. Hudson of the Arnett Chapel African American Episcopal Church, or AME Church, as some of you may know it, in Quincy, Florida. What's going on, B?
Not much. Glad to be here tonight. Glad to be able to have this particular conversation. It's going to be a little bit interesting. I'm hoping to shed some light on this from the AME perspective.
Yes, sir, brother. I appreciate you, man. Thank you for being a part of this. Next, we want to bring in my brother, the Reverend Julius R. Harris of the New Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church in Havana, Florida. What's going on, Jay?
What's happening, brothers, man? Good to see y'all tonight, man.
Yes, sir, brother. Thanks for being on, man. How's things going over at New Jay?
Going well, man. We just celebrated our 97th church anniversary,
Amen.
and we did that along with the family and friends Sunday, man. And this was powerful service, man. My father in the ministry, Pastor Black, came over and preached, man, and great fellowship.
Amen.
So, man, we're keeping them moving, bro.
I love that, brother. Love that, man. Next, we want to bring in Pastor Roosevelt N. Rogers III of the Old Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church, also in Havana, Florida. What's going on, Ro?
Everything good, man. How's it going? Excited about tonight's conversation.
Thank you, man. What's going on over at OJ, man? Anything new?
Man, everything good, man. Just celebrated, 14 years of pastoring.
14. That's right.
Pastor Harris came over and killed us, man. When quitting is not an option.
That's right. That's right. I love that. It's not, brother. Congratulations to you, man.
Yeah, man. And a good friend of mine, Eric Hoskins out of Cypress, Texas, came in Sunday, man, and preached. It's not what's on me, it's what's in me.
Hallelujah.
So we're excited, man. And we're getting ready to celebrate 124 years of church ministry next month, man. So we're kind of busy these last couple of months, man.
Amen, bro. Congratulations on all that, man. It's a blessing. And then our last covenant brother is our big brother, Pastor Richard Ash II of the Net Church. Our Kojic brother out of Quincy, Florida. What's going on with you, Ash?
Hey, man, I'm good. How y'all doing?
All is well, bro. All is well. I want to thank my brothers for being a part of our show tonight. We are the Covenant Brothers. This is our conversation. Each one of you get a chance to be a part of our discussion. As I aforementioned, the chats are live, and so feel free to provide commentary, lift a question if you want it to be lifted. As I did in the intro, tonight we're having an interesting conversation about successorship. Is it possible to successfully transition from the pulpit? Allow me kind of just to put things in perspective, if I may. Many of you know that I love to give data statistics. So let me put some things on the screen. Barna, which is a credible research organization, often talks about various things. One of the things that I found them talking about as it relates to transition, right, is talking about it from the perspective of transitioning. Is it becoming harder to find mature young Christians who want to become pastors? And you see on the screen that we're really starting to notice that it is, right, for varying reasons. They're finding it more and more challenging to find young preachers who want to become pastors. And so you look at the numbers from 2015 to 2022, you're seeing a major difference, especially amongst the green category, right? In 2015, it was about 45% that said they somewhat agree. That number went down 4% in 2022. The challenge, however, is that number increased from the strongly agree from 24% in 15 to 34% in 2022. So we're seeing the challenge, right? They're starting to take research of that. Let me show you a little bit more on the screen, if I may. This one here is, I'm concerned about the quality of future Christian leaders, right? Again, this is 2022. And so you're seeing that agree somewhat is a large percentage of those that they actually question for their survey in this regard. And so there is conversation being had as relates to future leadership in that regard. Another one that I think is worth sharing is my church puts a significant priority on training and developing the next generation of church leaders, right? Look at 2015, especially amongst the agree strongly, right? So you're seeing those numbers were wider. And now what you're seeing is disagree somewhat is the larger percentage in 2022. And so people are saying that they're not really seeing their church putting a strong emphasis in training the next generation of church leaders. We're going to talk about that in our discussion tonight, because depending upon your ministerial and pastoral upbringing, right, you view your associate ministers differently in certain contexts. And then lastly, I wanted to give you this one. I'm a senior pastor. How do you prioritize developing a leadership pipeline within your organization, right? And so you see this. The larger one is 40%. I have thought about the need, but have too many other ministry concerns, right? And so many of us can relate to that, right? With this, the busyness of ministry and the busyness of either church growth or just the needs of our ministry don't have us really spending time thinking about the next dispensation, the next wave of what that looks like in the pipeline, right? The second one is where it says that I make it a top personal priority, right? So there are some who actually think about that and how that looks. Tonight, we're going to talk about openly and honestly and all those things. And I think it's important to have that conversation. So I share with you, we have different denominational backgrounds, right? I grew up Baptist, but our church is non-denominational. Bernard is a pastor in the AME church. Jay is a pastor in a missionary Baptist church, as is Ro. But Ro also has full gospel involved in their ministry. And then Ash is Kojic. So each of our denominations may view this completely different. So we want to talk about that in that regard. Lastly, I want to say before we go to our first question is I would submit for consideration that in almost every facet of life, we see transition in place. In the professional workplace, we see transition in place. Most of your Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, they already have in place at least one or two people who are in observation for next in line to succeed, whomever it may be. They have the severance packages in place. All those things play out. In church, however, and I would submit probably more in the predominantly Black church that I'm familiar with, we don't have that in place. And usually what happens is the pastor gets gravely sick or dies, and then that church is enforced to start looking at successors in that regard. And sometimes that may be multiple years before you actually name someone as that pastor to succeed your predecessor in that regard. So tonight, let's have an open, honest conversation about this. I want to begin with my brother, Dr. Hudson, if I can. And I want to allow for, I'm going to put question one on the screen. I want to allow for him to really kind of unpack it from the AME church, because many don't understand how each denomination may approach this. The first question is, why do you believe pastors avoid starting a succession process? And B, as you share from the AME context, walk into that question as well. But please share for everybody to understand that.
Thanks. I really appreciate having the opportunity to kind of talk about this and share a little bit more, shed some light on how we function, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, how we function as a denomination. I want to hit the question and then get into how we function, because I think that it'll be easier for me to do it that way. But I believe that that some pastors avoid starting a succession process when they're consumed with it being about them. If it becomes them, if it's their platform, sometimes they feed into, in other words, they start drinking their own Kool-Aid. And so they start thinking, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose the glamour or the highlights or the attention that they think comes along with that. So I think that may be a reason why people avoid starting a succession plan. Now, I'll say for being AME, this isn't something that we address. This isn't something that we can focus on, because when we think about, from our perspective, I'm an itinerant elder in the AME church, and our appointments, we are appointed to churches by bishops. So bishops make the appointments. We have presiding elders, which are somewhat like middle managers. So you have the pastors, and then you have presiding elders that are above the pastors, that are the middle managers for the bishops who preside over Episcopal districts. And it's interesting, I was just in the latter part of August in our general conference, the 52nd session of the 52nd quadrennial session of the general conference, and we actually elected 6 bishops. And you all know Dr. Julius McAllister, who's now Bishop McAllister, was elected and consecrated a bishop in the AME church. And so when we begin to think about this, bishops are appointed, and then we have bishops over Episcopal districts. And our Episcopal district is what we call the 11th Episcopal district, which covers the entire state of Florida and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And within that district, we have conferences. And so I'm in what we call the Florida Conference, which goes from about Pensacola to Madison. And so that's a large area. Within that, we have presiding elder districts, and I'm on what we call the Quincy Monticello presiding elder district. Well, as a pastor, I get an appointment for 1 year at a time. So each year, and we just came out of annual conference about 2 weeks ago, each year I can get reappointed to the church. And that's why we don't really do anniversaries for us. We do appreciations, because it's not really an anniversary, because at any time I could be appointed to a new church. And keeping that kind of thought in mind, that's why we don't really work on succession planning, because I don't have a say in who replaces me. That's up to our bishop, and the presiding elder makes a recommendation, but ultimately the bishop is the one that does the appointment. We had someone who retired this year, and they just so happened to be reappointed 32 times. So they were at this church 32 years, and that's a rarity. You don't often see that happening. And each year, 90 days before we go into an annual conference, we get what's called the 90-day letter. And it's a letter that says to us, there's a possibility that you could be moved to somewhere else. And so in keeping that in mind, it's like each year you kind of start over. Each year is a fresh year. And so we get a 1-year appointment to the place where we're going. And so when you reach that age, and pastors have to retire by the age of 75 in our church, they won't let you pastor longer than that. But when you retire, you go out. Depending on how they feel about you, they may allow you to provide some input on some people, but we don't make that decision. So we don't do, there isn't succession planning for us. We serve at the pleasure of the bishop, and we serve those for 1 year at the time. So it's an interesting concept when we look at it across Black churches in general, and kind of how we function as an AME church.
I guess y'all can hear my wonderful voice because I was on mute. I'm gonna bring Ash in. Ash, why don't you speak to that question, man, from the Kojic perspective?
From a Kojic perspective, it's kind of similar to the AME in a certain sense, because we have a jurisdictional bishop, and then we have a superintendent that's under him, and then we have districts that we are part of. But on another level, the local church is a lot more powerful within the Church of God in Christ. But it's ultimately up to the bishop who appoints and allows pastors under his jurisdiction. But a lot of times they will take the recommendation of that local church. And but when it comes to why do you believe pastors are avoiding start a succession process, for some of us, and I'll just be honest with me, I hadn't thought that far into it. I'm honest. I'm just being honest with you. I have not sit down and just be like, thinking about my succession plan when I'm kind of in the day to day. And what I mean by day to day, I'm still kind of like I'm still working the part I'm in. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And a lot of times, other than like we can be like, I understand, or like Bernard said, they're year to year. We're not year to year. The only reason for you to be kind of removed or placed somewhere else if you desire to go somewhere else, or some things may happen where the bishop then has to step in along with the superintendent to kind of straighten out some things within the local church. But that's on a whole nother lesson right there. But we don't have what I would say is official succession plan within the church that I know of. I just put it that way. A lot of times what happens in our churches pretty recently is they have someone that's been there, or they might have a family member, which causes some kind of problem sometimes when it's family who succeeds at a church, when maybe they're not the most qualified or the person that think they should be there. And we done saw churches split up, districts split up, jurisdictional split up for all these kind of reasons. Because like Bernard said, a lot of times what happens is, because you've been drinking that Kool-Aid so long, nobody wants to change that up. You see what I'm saying? As well as, let's be honest, the monetary blessings that come along with this also, some they ain't ready. Let's be honest. They ain't ready to get that. I mean, let's be honest. It ain't just the preaching. You know what I'm saying? It ain't just the preaching that some of these folks want. Now, that's being real. And so when you get used to being the first family and all that stuff there, and you might have a minister or elder who's been serving faithfully, but he don't get the appointment because they're gonna keep it within the family. Because the family tell you pretty much, if we don't get it, we'll split it up. You know what I'm saying? And you have to deal with what you have to deal with that. So I know I walked when I was appointed and to the church where I'm at now, where my father was before. I wanted to make sure that the people that's what they want. I was and not many people know this part, but I had a mindset I was going somewhere else. There was another church, I was going there, but things didn't work out that way, and I ended up coming to Quincy, which I thank God for. Either or, I was thanking God for either or, because once I had made a decision and really understood that, Lord, I can't run away from this call any longer, then I was going to walk in it. You see what I'm saying? So regardless of where it was going, it didn't make a difference to me because I was accepting the call. So, but that still has to be something that our bishop has to agree to and do the appointment for you to be there. And once you're there, there may be some, like I said, I don't have a specific plan to say, this is what's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. I don't, but because honestly, I had not got to that point where I have thought about that. I haven't.
I respect that, brother. Let me bring you in, Jay.
Yeah, bro. Man, that's good dialogue, man. Just good content. And it's just interesting just to hear, B and Ash, man, talk about just the structure that their churches have, man. We don't have that. Our church is autonomous, so it's really on us to do it. I mean, that local particular pastor that's there, and the staff. But to the question, Miles Monroe, he has a sermon where he's preaching about leadership, and in that sermon he talks about a dream that he had, right, where he saw a leader in a casket with a baton in his hand, and I think that one of the reasons why some pastors avoid starting the succession process is because, man, some of them really want to die with the baton in their hand. They don't want to pass it. So I think this conversation is vital. And I think for us, we haven't really seen many models in Black church spaces on how to really transition out. In most Black churches, man, and I just start here. I had a great conversation this week with today actually with Pastor John Wooden, who's a mentor of mine, and man, in my opinion, he's he's been one of the best models.
Yeah.
Me as a Baptist pastor, how to transition out of pastoring. I think pastors avoid it for a few reasons. I think again, some of us are detached from reality for some reason. Man, we think that we're gonna do this forever, and that's just not true. I think also fear of letting go, fear of their legacy dying. I mean, B and Ash just talked about that. I wouldn't say this. He said that we're always concerned about legacy and longevity. So I think we have to understand that the church didn't belong to us.
Talk to us.
Yeah. So he said this. He said, Jay. He said we got to have the proper perspective about the church and really understand that the church is not ours. Another reason I think is they have no financial plan. Man, I've seen this, man, too, man. My predecessor, man, he didn't have a retirement plan, and he pastored until he was 85 years old, and he did it not because he wanted to, but he did it because he had to.
Yeah.
Financially, he still needed that check, man, and so a lot of pastors are in that situation. Man, I think if most black pastors had like a retirement plan or 401k, bro, waiting on them, they would have retired during the pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of pastors, man, post pandemic are still pastoring, not because they want to.
Yeah.
Because man, this whole digital stuff, man, they ready to go home, bro. But they can't do it. And last, I think the fear of not being able to function. I think for far too many pastors, their entire being is tied to what they do. Man, a lot of guys, man, they don't know who they are outside of being called Reverend so and so.
Wow, that's good.
So so man, for them, they hadn't started that process because they don't know what they're gonna do. I bet I would. I bet I knew what to do. Listen, I can't wait. I can't wait to get up on a Sunday morning and take my wife and my grandbaby, man, to brunch. You know what I'm saying? And go to breakfast, man. Hit a breakfast spot up. But but that's what some people are. I close with this. Also, Wood said that many pastors don't even think about an exit plan, man. He said that we have to hear this, guys. He said this. He said we got to go into pastoring with the mindset that I got to be faithful unto death, but I'm not dying in the pulpit.
Come on, sir.
Yeah.
Come on, sir.
So I end there.
Wow. Roosevelt Rogers III, whose team's about to lose for second weekend in a row. How about you, my brother?
Listen, man, I turned that game off, bro.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roosevelt is a diehard Cowboys fan, and we get great pleasure in giving it to him every time they lose.
Yes, sir, man.
Right now. Go ahead, my brother.
I'm trying to model great is thy faithfulness.
I understand.
But I agree with what all the brothers have already said, man. I think, truth be told, man, it just wasn't modeled for us. So we didn't even, we didn't even know what succession was, man, until probably the last maybe 10 or 15 years. Because what we've seen is, man, senior pastors, literally dying in the pulpit, where, they have to be helped to the lectern, man.
Yes, sir.
Literally.
Yes, sir.
And sometimes, man, you can notice that the cognitive skills are diminishing, man. But I think the people in the pews, man, were just faithful to the pastors, man. So I think, as Jay said, man, Pastor Wooden has really modeled that. I can speak from the full gospel perspective, man. Within the last maybe 5 or so years, many of our senior seasoned pastors, man, are transitioning from full-time pastoring, and they have a succession plan in place. I agree with what Jay said, man. I think it's a financial situation for many. All they know is pastoring, all they know is church. But I think we're that generation, man, where we're gonna have to start modeling that for our churches. But I'll say, man, even to the fact, man, I think some of them are even intimidated by their sons or daughters that's in the house. But I'm a firm believer, man. I tell my preachers all the time, man, I want y'all to out-preach me.
Talk, sir.
Because that says, in essence, we're doing our job. We always want our sons and our daughters, even from a biological and spiritual place, man, they ought to be better than us. Because every, me and Jay talk about this all the time, man. When you hear me and Jay preach, you hear O'Hara C. Black.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's what you hear. Because man, his thing was, if it ain't in the book, if you can't show me in the text, there's no need to say it, man. So I think if we get to the place where we are preparing, and as said it too, man, we ain't really think about it. But I am.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, man. I jokingly, seriously say, man, I want to retire at 60.
Yeah.
That's 11 years and about 8 months.
Yeah.
That's what Roosevelt wants to do. Now, of course, we know we got to do what God's will is for our lives. But in that, then we've got to make sure that we're starting to put stuff in place, man. So I think that fact that we haven't thought about it, some are intimidated, some that's their only financial means. Jay tells, Jay and I've had conversations, man, where we've talked about pastors, man, that literally when they retired, the church wanted to cut them off, man, and that was their only means of finances.
Yeah.
And so Greg Oliver talks about this. Bishop Craig Oliver talks about this, man. His pastor was Pastor Hightower, and when he became pastor, man, he said the one thing: as long as I'm pastoring here, he will get his entire salary until he leaves. And so until Pastor Hightower passed, he made sure that he took care of his successor. And I think that's another thing and that may be another topic for another day, man, that if we put this in place, what is the church means of making sure that their pastors who have served for so long are taken care of.
I appreciate you guys, man. So my context is a little bit different, as you guys know, because the Lord favored me 14 years ago to plant a church, which was not my desire, but it was God's will. And in that regard, things are a little bit different, right? Because when you plant a church, if you don't do things right at the outset, especially through bylaws and constitution, you literally could create your own local kingdom, right? You can have everything surrounding you. And I will tell you in the beginning years of our ministry, it looked that way. And a lot of it is because I was blessed to birth the ministry, but also I didn't trust those around me, right? Because I carried it for so long, it had to look a certain way and I wouldn't have my hands on everything. As ministry goes on, if you want to have any success in ministry, you have to come to the realization quickly that this is not about you, that God is using you, it's not about you. And so several years ago, the Lord on my sabbatical spoke to me about a new governance structure where we have the ministries that go up through my ministerial team, right? Now, granted, every ministry is different. Some don't have the ministers that I'm blessed to have in that regard, and the maturity that I have in that regard. But I think about succession a lot. Our ministry through our board of directors actually have gone through a strategic conversation and process for succession, whether that be through my untimely death or me retiring. What does that look like, right? If I were to have untimely death, what happens to my wife and children, right? From that perspective. If I retire at a certain age, which I have an age in mind from actually full-time preaching, what does that look like for not only the ministry, man, but for my family? Let me just put this there because I am one that I think this is important to put on record. I can think about succession, and I think about it often, and we have a plan in place. Also because I have other streams of income that comes in, right? My only pay ain't the church, and I want to speak to those pastors where, your only income is the ministry and the ministry alone. That also creates a major, as you guys have been talking about financial situation, because now you are heavily dependent. And COVID should have been an awakening for a lot of people, right? Because people aren't giving as they used to give prior to COVID. People also don't have it like they used to have for some standpoints in that regard. So you have to be mindful of what that looks like. But if you're not careful as a church planner, man, you can create a kingdom where everybody worships you idly because the whole face has always been you. One of my greatest, if not greatest, fear in ministry as a pastor is Bible-based church dying when I die, or Bible-based church dying when I retire. If that even gets remotely close, that means I failed in leadership, that I did not position it well. Again, I've grown up from birth in Illinois to growing up in Los Angeles to being in Tallahassee. I've been under 3 pastors. 2 of them died in the pulpit, not literally, but they died as the pastor well into their advanced ages. One of them was suffering, was senile and hard of hearing. One suffered from cancer, right? And was in the pulpit every Sunday preaching. And so once both of them died, those ministries went through a period of no successor in place. And if you're in a traditional Black Baptist church, there is a process where the moderator gets brought in and so on and so on and so on. and the ministry suffers. The people are going without leadership. The last verse in the last chapter of the book of Judges, it said, and there was no king in Israel. Everyone did was right in their own eyes. And we got to be careful about that, because Jay had the blessed privilege, although Pastor Maxwell passed well into his 80s, is that he also played a big role in who was his successor, right? You don't see that a lot either. I got to give public credit to Jacob Chapel Baptist Church, because their bylaws was created where there's a process in place of how succession will take place when the pastor retired or resigned in that regard. We don't see that, right? So I think that's important. Let me segue into question number 2. And Jay, I'm going to come to you first, because you kind of already started hitting on this, but I think it's important. When we look at it from a church's perspective, what should be in a church's succession plan? I know that a lot of times talk about it from a pastor's perspective, right? Of the pastor having a major voice in his or her succession plan. But from the church's perspective, right? What should a church take into consideration to make sure they don't find themselves in that 1, 2, or 3 year gap of not having leadership?
I'll be real brief too, bro. I don't have much for that. I just think, just salary, vacation, healthcare, retirement, maybe 401k. I think every church needs to have some type of retirement plan in place. I know some churches are small, they can't do much, but I think something is better than nothing. A lot of churches, and this is just our context, bro. A lot of traditional Baptist churches, when the pastor leaves, man, they'll give him a benefit program and raise him an offering, and that's it. And so, man, that's it. So, man, you can't go far off that. And the sad reality, man, is you committed, years and years and years of your life to something, man, and then you walk away from it financially. It's horrible.
Yeah.
I also think that the church also needs to have, and Pastor Wood and I talked about this today, some type of core values, so that the new pastor coming in will come in knowing what he or she is coming into. Then, of course, a pulpit committee that's a representation of that entire church, not just the deacon brethren. You know what I'm saying? But with some youth on that committee, different age groups, and I don't think also that it shouldn't be something that should be sprung up on people quick. One thing that Pastor Wooden told me, man, is that he prepared his people for it, and so I think it's important that we have conversations, man. We start speaking it, let it come from our mouths. About, hey, look, I'm not going to be here forever. I think we have to get it into our congregation's head that, hey, look, that you're not going to pastor there forever. And I think I like how you worded the question, man. Do you have a plan, or do you plan to pastor until you die? Because my predecessor, man, that was his plan. He wanted to go from the pulpit to heaven.
Yeah.
Some older pastors, man, they want to die in the pulpit. You know, our generation is different. We don't want to die in the pulpit. We want to die on the beach.
Yeah, come on now.
On the beach.
Come on now, brother.
We want to die out in the country. We want to die, in the Caribbean. I mean, cross seas somewhere. But again, man, I think that just those things. I think that, just having something in place, man. I think something is better than nothing, bro.
Yeah, let me jump on this one too, and then I'm going to come to you, B. And I know it's different from the AME perspective. I still want you to have your perspective put in this conversation. I wasn't aware of this, when I mentioned earlier about our board. We went through a whole process. One thing that our board was adamant about is they actually brought in an expert to see what kind of package they can put in play. And here was the directive I asked him to operate under, and I wasn't involved, but I asked him to operate under this directive. Bible-based church without Pastor D as the pastor, right? So if you find yourself having to put out a application or notice for a new pastor, right? Put together a package in that regard. So insurance, right? Things of that nature. What does that look like? And don't factor in what I'm blessed to be able to have outside a Bible-based church from a financial perspective. Along with that assignment, something came out of it from the insurance expert that I thought was critically important. And I want to give credit to Deacon Charles Hart, who's the chair of our board, is Key Man Insurance. And what Key Man Insurance is here's the fact of the matter, especially in the Black church. What they argue is you are naive to assume that if your pastor retires or dies, that your church will not be impacted. Even with the best succession plan in place, right? There are people who are going to either leave, and therefore their finances leave with them. They're going to be inconsistent in their attendance. There's going to be an impact, right? That ministry is going to be impacted by the loss of that pastor. So having things in place to try to help cover that ministry in that loss. When you operate from a church budget perspective, right, you budget in based on what you're seeing from a Sunday or monthly perspective. That's going to be impacted if that pastor's been there for 10, 20, 30 years. Now they're gone. People are going to be looking elsewhere or being inconsistent in how they give. So how does that church remain whole or close to whole in that regard? So Key Man Insurance is speaking about the pastor is a key man or key woman in that ministry, and so you gotta factor that in. And that's not idol worship, that's not arrogance, that's the reality of it all. Is that, you know, unlike our white counterpart pastors, right, who may have a board of elders and they may share the preaching. In the Black Congregational Church, there is a lion's share of preaching done by the senior pastor. Right, you are the set voice in that regard, and so that ministry will experience some challenges, and Lord forbid if that ministry goes through a scandal, right, where something happened where that pastor is up in a scandal, and now that church really suffers impact. So how do you keep that ministry whole? So I would say two things to that church. Number one is don't assume you can't put together, as Jay mentioned, some kind of insurance package. Bring in an expert, let him or her help you really assess what you have and what you can offer. I think that's so very important. And number two, you need to really look at your church governing documents, your bylaws, your constitution, what's in there, what's not in there. Pastor Joseph Wright from Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church here in Tallahassee taught me this before I became a pastor. He said, if you get a church that calls you to be their pastor, before you say yes, you should ask them for a copy of their bylaws and constitution. You need to read their governing document. You need to read what that document will allow you to do or not do as their new pastor. That's great counsel. And so it's important to speak to that. But also that document upholds legally when you have things in place. And so again, I know from the AME perspective it's different, but we want to have your perspective. If it's not about AME, man, just from a pastoral perspective, man, let us know how you feel about this.
So, I mean, it's quite interesting to kind of have this conversation, and it makes me reflect on, you know, how things work being AME. So the AME Church in general puts aside monies. You pay it through our different assessments and budgets that is supposed to be for annuities and retirement for pastors once they reach the retirement age. And so that's part of what's created and from our church from a connectional perspective. So the AME Church from a connectional perspective, and it trickles down to each and every church, and it's based upon what that pastor's salary is and what they contribute, what the church is able to contribute, and that goes toward retirement once they reach the age of retirement. I've said as well that and I'm gonna say it here, I don't plan to pastor until I'm 75. I do not plan to do that. I've been kind of doing this all my life. So I don't plan to die in the pulpit.
Yes, sir.
But I don't, the church, even though they plan for retirement for pastors, they don't really have a succession plan other than the way that our church is set up to appoint new pastors. What I do is, because we do get the notice that there's the possibility that we could be moved each year, I get with the secretary, and she's what I call steward, which would be a deacon in the Baptist church. She's my steward pro tem, and we pull together what we call a transition package. And so in that transition package, it has all of the pertinent information that a new pastor coming in would need to know to be able to pick up that church and be able to go on to the next level. Also, each year we do a church conference that sets out the organization and kind of a church calendar for the year. And so that new pastor will be able to get that information, at least get it for the previous year, but also that transition package, which shows them what they need to know, who are the respective officers, where's the money at. That's what most people want to know when you get there. Where's the money at? How much you get? So it has all that information. It has other information about insurances that the church may have, that kind of stuff. And so it helps that pastor to not come there and trying to find it. That packet can be handed over to the new pastor, and then that new pastor can in turn have somewhere to start. So it's not necessarily a succession plan, but it is a transition plan to help that new pastor. And I think you said something that was a great point, is that that people fall in love with the pastor, and we can sit here and act like it doesn't happen, but it does, because of the personality of the pastor. Not it won't be everybody, but some people are going to fall in love. And so as Darrick indicated, once that pastor leaves for whatever the reason, and so we run that risk at being AME. I run that risk every single year. So I have to stand up and I'll say, oh, it has been great this year, and I got my letter, and I'm looking forward to coming back. But I don't know what the bishop's choice is going to be each time. He may choose. And so what the letter essentially says is that you're getting this because you're being notified that your gifts and talents may be used or may be needed somewhere else. And so that is expressed to the people. And prayerfully, what's done is that the bishop assesses those gifts and talents and determines if it's time for me to move on, that he's sending me somewhere that they can be used, but also sending the people what the people need to be able to take that church further. But that takes an honest assessment by those stewards and those officers who are there, the presiding elder who's also in that process, to determine, because everybody doesn't, and to be honest with you, everybody didn't work everywhere.
Come on now.
Their gifts and talents. And just because God has called you doesn't mean you're going to be successful. It does not mean you're going to work everywhere you're sent, because someone gave me a book once that was titled "One Size Does Not Fit All." So I can't feel that the gifts and talents that God has given me is going to work everywhere that I may turn up. I would pray that God is in that process where I go. So God determines where I'm sent. But when we have the human element, there could be some other things that are in place. And so when we think about this whole thing of succession planning, and I'm speaking from the AME perspective, we don't have the opportunity to do that. So we lean heavily on the direction and the godly judgment of our bishop to send us to the places where our gifts and talents will be used, and prayerfully. And it was difficult because the pastor, I'm going to talk about Arnett Chapel, the pastor who was at the church where I am now, he was there for 14 years, and he left, God rest his soul, he's deceased now, but he left because he got sick. And he got sick. And so now, and he was sick for a little while, maybe up to a year. And then I have to come in behind a pastor who they loved, and who the church decided it was time for, not the church as in Arnett Chapel, but the church as in the bishop and the presiding elders decided, okay, now we got to put somebody else in there. So that was difficult, coming in behind somebody who they love, who did not go out under his own terms, if you know what I'm saying. And so that was difficult, trying to replace or trying to come in and do that. And so in thinking about that, the new pastors who are coming in, and also the church has to give that new pastor coming in some latitude to be able to succeed that person who's going out, understanding that that person is not going to be the same as the one that left, and giving them the opportunity for those gifts and talents to come to full fruition. And so I think it's important for us to have these discussions. And also, I think it was mentioned, to train up the leaders.
My God.
I believe that the church ought to be able to run without me there. And so sometimes we think we're helping, but we're handicapping when we don't equip the church to run without you.
My God.
Because what should be able to happen is, especially in my case, when they bring in a new pastor, that church ought to be running like a well-oiled machine, and all that new pastor needs to come in and have that focus on preaching, on teaching, on visiting the sick, on burying the dead, and marrying those. But when they have to come in and they have to be everything because that previous pastor wouldn't allow that or wouldn't teach that way, I think we create a problem for that. So I guess in that sense, that is succession planning, even though we don't have a lot of say in who's going to be that next person, especially under our denomination.
Come on in, Ash.
I think a lot of this is really, for me personally, kind of thought provoking. I'm listening to you guys, and because, like I said, this is not something that I have given a whole lot of thought to, honestly. I mean, I guess also too because I work also.
Yeah.
I've thought about my retirement, you know, from my secular job, but I had not actually thought about, okay, well, what about, the ministry, the so-called the moving on, or anything of that nature. And I'm almost at the point where I just want to mute myself and just sit back and listen. I'm being honest.
Listen, brother, I
I'm being
respect it.
I'm being honest because a lot of it I'm learning. I'm actually sitting here listening and learn and trying to take it in because it's a lot to think about. Um, on that wise, when I have not given it that much of a thought, and it is,
Yeah.
but now it's like right here now. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
a lot of this at night, I know I usually kind of talk it, but when I don't, if it's something I'm not like an expert in or I don't know anything about, I defer. You know what I'm saying? That because it like B said, it's a lot of similarities in ours other than the every year appointment, but it's a lot with our church where, in all actuality, at my leaving, I can suggest, the church can want, but it's still ultimately going to be up to that bishop if they stay in that jurisdiction what's going to happen. Now, there have been plenty of times where, you won't work with us, no problem. We'll pull the church out of your jurisdiction, and somebody else will be more than happy to come on in because you're bringing some offering. And I'm just being real with you.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? That's just, that's the honest part of it. A lot of it is, if you don't do, yeah, we'll find it's a bishop that will. You know what I'm saying? So I could be in Quincy and I could be under the bishop in Tanzania somewhere if he want me. You see what I'm saying? So, but I'm just being honest with you. But it's a for me it's a lot. It's a lot. I have a lot I'm thinking about at this time. So I'm gonna defer you guys. I mean, if it's something that I'll jump in with, but honestly, I'm sitting here just trying to eat as much as I can because I'm learning from this. I am.
Absolutely.
I'm learning.
Absolutely. Come on in, Ro.
Okay, I'm kind of like Ash. Hadn't put much thought to it outside of, I just know I don't want to be pastoring after I turn 60. And again, I'll say this: that ain't
you 58 now, ain't you?
Hey, 11 years and 8 months. and I'm saying that loosely, man. I'm not saying that like that's a definitive date.
Yeah.
It's kind of along the lines of what Bernard said, man. My desire is not to pastor into my 70s. I do know that.
Come on now.
And so conversations, are starting to be had. I'm expressing that a little bit more, so kind of like what I think it was Jay that said it, man. That shouldn't be a last minute thing that we pop on our church, from the pastor's perspective. But Jay said something, man, in a conversation. It's been a while, man, that Jay said this. He says, we give the church the best years of our life.
My God.
And after that, it's like, thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
And nothing really is being in place. Now, the blessing is, like many of us that are bivocational, I'm not dependent upon the church to sustain me after I'm no longer am pastoring. But that is a conversation that I think should be had. Bernard, when you said, man, that transition package plan, I think that's critical that we really, as all of our ministries, may need to start looking at if we haven't. Darrick, you mentioned something about the key man from an insurance perspective, and the tragedy and the sad thing about it, man, is we had a conversation at our church about it when we had an insurance guy come in, but we never moved on it, man. So just imagine where we would be, had we jumped on that 15 years ago, 10 years ago, by putting something in place that if something was to happen to the pastor, whether it was accidental or death, the church is secure. And so, the harsh reality is, man, our Caucasian counterparts have been doing this for decades. They see the benefit of insurance and how you can change the wealth dynamics of your family or your ministry that God has blessed you to lead by insurance. And so I'm kind of like Ash, man. I don't really have much to say on that aspect of what should be there because we've never really thought about it. But I think it's something that needs to be at the forefront of all of our conversations.
Let me say this to our listening audience, and I want to again thank all those who are listening on all of our platforms that we're live on, and even those who listen to the rebroadcast whenever they do. I am in no way, and we're in no way trying to thrust you into retirement, right? This is really supposed to be thought-provoking and encouraging in that regard. Each of us come from a different pastoral context on tonight, our covenant brothers, and so we approach it differently. At the same point, we must be mindful, as B mentioned regarding the AME church, where there's a mandatory retirement age, right? And so at 75, I can't exceed this number. And so the hope is that you've had that in place and put things in place. Each denomination does things completely different than others, right? In the traditional Black Baptist church, there are some exceptions, right? But for the most part, that moderator is going to be brought in to help that church prepare for whomever's going to be a successor. They don't come in usually until that pastor made a decision to retire, or Lord forbid that pastor has died. But I've been in church my entire life, as have my brothers, and I've seen it from grown up Baptists. I've seen pastors, man, who literally are being escorted to the pulpit, and they physically can't do anything other than stand. And when they preach, and they flop back down in their chair. They are feeble in that regard. And so for me, when COVID occurred, and I'm still young in age, especially from a pastoral perspective, but when COVID took place, I recognized and realized that there is a lot going on in the world outside of the pulpit. And I hold the pulpit in high regard, and I hold the church that I'm blessed to pastor in high regard. But it was never, I don't believe it's ever been the Lord's will for there only be one voice at Bible-based church ever, right? Forever. At some point, my voice will be silenced. Somebody else's voice will become the set voice of that house. And so making sure that I'm in a position to hear from God and prepare the church in that regard. Listen, you can't stop members from loving their pastor and loving them to the point that they only want to hear from you alone. Listen, again, been in church my entire life. I used to watch people get up and literally walk out when a preacher got up that wasn't the set pastor. I literally would get up and walk out as that pastor took their text. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I've experienced it, right? There are preachers I love to listen to who preach, and if they're not in their pulpit on Sunday mornings preaching, I go find another station to watch. I mean, so I've been there as well. Having said that, however, I want to lift to the listening ears Exodus chapter 18, just for those who are listening to us. I think Jethro gave Moses some of the greatest advice ever, right? Jethro was visiting his daughter and his son-in-law and his grandchildren, and he witnessed, after monitoring Moses for an entire day, he witnessed what Moses was doing by way of giving judgment to the people, sitting all day and all night, rendering just judgment on every matter, large, medium, and small. And Jethro's words to Moses were so profound when he said, "You're going to kill yourself. You cannot sustain this way." That, after I read that on my sabbatical a few years ago, God gave me a fresh revelation of how I was pastoring Bible-based church. And those words hit differently when I realized that for years prior, I had been praying for the Lord to send me ministerial help. God then sent me ministerial help, suitable, qualified help. But I was so used to having my head down in the trenches that I wasn't really appreciating or utilizing that help. And on my sabbatical, the Lord said to me, "You're going to kill yourself." But here's why the Lord said it. I went to God very weary and frustrated that we weren't further along that I wanted us to be. And the Lord said these exact words to me: Bible-based church is stuck because of you. They're stagnant because of you. Saying this to me because everything at the church looks like you. No one can make a decision as a leader unless they bring it to pastor, and pastor has to decide on it in pastor's timing. versus raising up the ministerial help, right? And so Jethro told Moses how to do this, right? He gave them tiers. You go to the book of Numbers, the Lord tells Moses, I think it's in chapter 11, he tells Moses, bring your leaders to the place. I'm going to come down and converse with you. And the oil that's on your life, Moses, I'm going to also put on their lives. They may help you bear this weight. Think about Moses on the mountain. Whenever Moses' hands was up, the people were winning. When it went down, they were down, they were losing. So the Lord, that Joshua and began to uphold his hands. What it's showing you is this work is too much for one of us to do by ourselves. And so you have to think about that. But how do you think, how do any vision God gives should outlive us, right? It should outlive us. And I think that's so critically important. I watched my brother, Pastor Jay, honor Pastor Maxwell, even in Pastor Maxwell's death. God bless him. I watched Jay honor him because Jay made a good point. When that pastor you succeed retires or dies off, the people that you're pastoring, they're still not your people, right? They're your predecessors' people for a long period of time, and you may never win over the totality of all those individuals, but it should not prevent you also, right? That the previous generation of pastors before us, and even I would say our grandfather generation of pastors, right? Their livelihood was the pulpit, or they knew was the pulpit. The way they pastored was that way. And so they never thought about it. But guess what? The church also never thought about how it looks without that person there. So not only did the pastor have a succession plan, either that church have a plan in place. And so what happens is life happened. And now that ministry found itself faced and forced to be able to react to something in that regard. And so for the sake of our time, I want to take what I had to be the bonus question, make it our third question, and kind of begin to wrap it up in this regard. And it's a simple question, right? Which is, do you think that succession is scripturally supported, right? Does the Bible support succession plan? I would argue yes. And it may not be, it's not as plain as, it is from a pastoral perspective, but I think it's important that the Bible definitely speaks about Jesus himself, uttered the words of saying, greater work shall you do, right? Like he's preparing his disciples to the work must continue even after I'm gone. Now, granted, I'm going to still be with you, but this work does not halt in that regard. And so I believe that it does, but I want to get you all's perspective. I'm going to open it up, man, for any of you to jump in on that question.
I'll jump in. I think it is. If you go back to the Old Testament, even before Jesus, if you just go back and you look at the Elijah and Elisha situation, there was a transfer of the mantle. There was a transfer of the anointing from one prophet to the other. And I believe it was God ordained. But the key is how God did it. It had to be caught. When you read that, it was literally caught. When he saw him go up, he said, this is what is to take place. And so I think it is biblical, man. I think it is our responsibility as leaders to kind of watch with that eye to see how those that are serving under us. And again, Bernard, I know your situation, Ash, I know your situation is a little different being, Kojic and AME. I like the uniqueness of being under the full gospel covering. While we have a covering, our church is still has its own autonomy, where we're still able as the local church to make our decisions. They don't come in and appoint a pastor here at Old Jerusalem. Our members still have that vote, that voice to do that. So I think it's critical in my situation that if God is showing me a son or daughter of the house, or even somebody that may not be necessarily a part of the ministry, Jay can talk about that more than I can, because Jay was a minister here at Old Jerusalem before he went down and succeeded Pastor Maxwell at New Jerusalem. So I think it is biblical. But again, I think it was Ash that said something, or Bernard that said it, man. It's still based upon the people of that church, man. So I think if we're going to initiate that, if we're going to begin that type of ministry of succession, I think we're gonna have a lot of teaching to do within the African American church, because it is not something that has been on the forefront. But to answer that question, I do believe it is biblical.
I love that. I love that. Jay, why don't you speak to that, man? I'm
Yeah,
looking at the
for
time, man, but I
sure.
want you to speak to your succession of succeeding someone who had been there 40 plus years, man, and just what that looked like.
Man, yeah, man. I think can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, man. I succeeded Pastor Maxwell, man, who pastored our church for 53 years. And so I got a chance to serve alongside him for 2 years and before he went to heaven. And man, during that time, I made sure that, and I was intentional about making sure that I honored him um, while he was still living, man, and even after he passed away. I think one of my quotes, man, I love. The quote is always, always, always honor those who came before you. So I think
I love
because
that.
sometimes that is some guys are um they are reluctant to step aside or to retire because they feel like somebody's gonna just destroy their legacy, man. I mean, if you committed over 50 years or something, and then you got some young preachers stepping up, like now he does now. So now, okay, now let's really get the real ministry done. What you think we've been doing before you got it? so the church didn't just start. I understood that, man, that the church didn't start when I got there. I mean, they had been there. So I just try to make sure, man, that I honored him, man. To this day, I still try and do that at some point. But what I do also, I wanted to say this, that I try and make mention of it to my congregation, man, like in Bible study or in leadership team about, hey, pastor's not going to be here. I'm not going to pastor here, my entire life. Again, I think that we have to prepare them for the transition. I also think this, that the prayer life and the devotional life of the pastor is vital, man, because again, that's essential because we need to know what is God's will, even in terms of vision, right? So our church, a few years ago, man, we purchased a house across the street. And I was thinking about that, man. I see that house every single week, and I look at that house like, man, we got to do something with that house. Man, we got to get the funding for it. We got to do this, right? But then one day the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, it may not be this. What happens with that house may not happen under your leadership. That may be something for the next pastor. And so, man, I think being sensitive, man, to the Holy Ghost, man, and knowing what the will of God is as it relates to what is my assignment, how much of the vision am I supposed to do, so that I don't get, out of line trying to do so much when it could be for the next guy.
Yes, sir.
Or the next or female pastor, man, whatever God's will is. Again, Wooden also said this. He said that we also have to be true to ourselves about our effectiveness. And man, that was something when I heard him say that. He said we have to be true to ourselves in terms of our physical, emotional, and mental health. Are we burning out? A lot of pastors are burning out, man. Is my season coming to an end? Again, we got the Holy Ghost. So, and man, he said this and it blessed me. He said, so preaching is a calling. So preaching is something that we do until we die. But pastoring is, something we get to choose how long we're going to do it or not.
That's good. That's good.
So, because in some circles, if you start talking retirement, and stepping away from ministry, man, people just think that the devil done took over, man. You walking away from God. Matter of fact, I just preached that Roosevelt anniversary. Quit is not an option. Hey, quit is not an option, but retirement is. so I should have said that, bro. I need to redo. Yeah, so quitting is not an option, but retirement is, bro.
Yeah.
And so I think, man, we have to understand that, man, because again, we can't give our entire lives to our ministry, man, and then hey, we got, I can't go outside, Ash, and play with my grandbaby because I'm tired. You know what I'm saying, or whatever.
Come on,
man. We got to make sure, man, that we're sensitive to the Holy Ghost, man, and to God about when our time is up. But again, I think as it relates to Scripture, so you have the Moses and Joshua model. Joshua chapter 1, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that God spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun. Moses, my servant, is dead.
Yeah.
Joshua.
Yeah.
And so again, man, I think that we gotta seek, that next generation. And I do have associates in my church, But again, they're either older than me or around my age. And so I think, sometimes I've been intentional about giving younger pastors opportunities, man. I think I'll do more of that, this year, next year, give more younger guys opportunities just to come to our church and preach. I mean, you just know what, I don't know. I mean, right now it's kind of too soon to tell. But I do think we have to give younger preachers opportunities, man, to preach. Because you just never know, what God will do in that.
Go ahead, Ash.
I think sitting there thinking about something there. Like I said, this has been real thought provoking for me. But I was reminded of it was a pastor that was there when I was just a minister. Elder Wright, he was there. He pastored the pastor before my father got there. He was a pastor between the both of them, and as long as my father was there as pastor, he always made sure that Elder Wright still got an honorarium, and he did not succeed him. He succeeded another pastor, but he made sure that he showed honor and respect because he was a pastor at that church, that he still gave him an honorarium. And even after my father had left and I became pastor, I did the same thing. And that's all because of love. You see what I'm saying? That I'm standing on his shoulders also. So every first Sunday when I got an honorarium, the pastor Elder Wright, he got one too. And that was up until his death, that we made sure that we took care of him, that we showed him as a church that we appreciated and loved him, and did what we could. I wish we could have been in a position where we could have done a retirement where, but we weren't in that position. But such as I have, give I unto thee. And so we did that. And so looking at it now, I hope and pray that through all of this, that because of seed that were planted in me, and I turn around and plant in someone else, that I believe was good seed, that it's going to come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, I understand now listening to this that there are some other things that probably need to be in place or even thought about that are now, like I said, honestly, I am without words on a lot of this. I mean, honestly, I am being totally honest tonight. That honestly, this has been like mind blowing, really understanding, because I have not thought on that level. You know what I'm saying? I haven't. But at the same time, I pray and hope that I believe that this ministry that we have, fellas, and the friendship and love for one another, I believe that this is going to help out not just me, but I believe it's going to help out some other people also, because it now has you even thinking of that thought process that Jay said something. No, I don't want to be to a point where, because we all have been in church where we've been to a point where, we know it's I'll put in front a prime example of it, and I know we don't do political stuff, but a prime example is the Democratic Party has a whole different outlook right now than they did just a few months ago.
Come on now, that's true.
You see what I'm saying? That they know that regardless of how much, and we appreciate you and everything else, but this is not going to be able to do it. It's not. You see what I'm saying? And you got to think this. We talking about position that is the most powerful man-made position on this earth. So it wasn't an easy thing to sit there and say, you know what, and as well as some people had to, just be honest with you, like, hey, bro.
Yeah, man.
Hey, bro, you got. We don't know what day it is, what time it is, what's going on. You hurting us. You see what I'm saying? And I don't, believe me, I don't want to be in that position. Correct. I don't want to be in a position where you actually, you're being tolerated. You see what I'm saying?
That's good.
And we done been there where we like, I don't even know what's being said right now. You see what I'm saying? But out of respect and out of love for one another, we have gone through that. But I think God has given us in this generation a different grace that say, you know what? Because we know better now, let's do better. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We know better. Let's not hold on so long, like you said, to the point where it's really you're dragging the church down. But at the same time, we don't want to be to a point where we just kicking folk. We don't want to just be kicking you out.
There it is.
You see what I'm saying? So I think God gives us a balance that if If that pastor can handle it, he's still, you know what I'm saying, got his faculties and everything good, by all means, preach on, go on. But if you don't, then you got to be at a point where it's not, like you say, it's not to the point where we could be able to take care of you and be able to bless you and be able to help take care of you, but move you on also. So the ministry still can go on. Because as much as we say, you know, and all of us probably said this, and I know I'm like this, I don't want to be on nobody's pedestal. I don't know, but we do carry this position. And
Yes,
since
sir.
we do carry this position and our personalities to the point where, you know, people have come under us. You have kids that have grown up from little bitty kids now that are adults. You've been there all their life. You see what I'm saying? So it is an attachment and a love and everything else and a respect that they get from you that we just can't say, oh, your new person gonna come in and they're just gonna forward. No, it's not gonna go that way. But at the same time, it is something definitely that has me as a pastor thinking definitely from this. So I appreciate it, brothers. I honestly I do, and I appreciate this whole thing because this helped me tonight.
Amen, brother. B, let's close out with you, man.
So this has been a great conversation. I want to say this, and she's probably gonna kill me when I say it. My church secretary texted me while this was going on, and she said we develop a transition package, but she deletes it every year, and it kind of goes to that whole point about the transition. Yeah, she'll get me later. It kind of goes to that whole point about the transition, and really what this gets back to, it's kind of like having those conversations with your loved ones about your last wishes. Nobody wants to have those conversations. They're difficult to have, but we know we need to have those conversations because it's inevitable. And so when you think about a pastor transitioning for whatever that reason is, of whether it's retirement or whatever, it is the people go through a moment of bereavement and grief because it's the death of a relationship. So
Yes,
that
sir.
relationship
Yes,
goes
sir.
away. So people are hurting as a result of it. But I believe that it is biblical. I mean, Jesus did it. If you think about Matthew 28, when he says, "Go ye therefore," Jesus taught them, he showed them, and he said, "Now I got to go.
I gotta go.
Here's what y'all need to do, and I'm going to leave you with power to be able to do it." If you think about in Luke chapter 24, he says, "I need you to go and wait for the power my Father has promised you." That power, that Holy Spirit power, is what was supposed to enable that next group, those disciples, to be able to carry on that work. I think that one of the things, and I think it was Roosevelt that mentioned it, but it was Hughes that mentioned it. We have to begin to ask questions, real questions about our effectiveness. You got to have those real conversations with the people who are in leadership. Am I standing in the way of what this church can become? Is that happening? And we're talking about succession, but we also need to think about, sometimes, is it time for me to go now? I ain't ready to stop pastoring, but is it time for me to go now? Is it time for me to transition to something else now? Have you outlived, as Julia said, have you outlived what God has called you to do in that place? Is it now time for somebody else to be able to do that? So you got to have those conversations, and that's about real conversations. It's about having, I believe pastors ought to be evaluated. You ought to have some people who ought to be able to evaluate the pastor to talk about whether or not you're doing the job. Because if you're not doing the job, you're essentially killing the church, and the church might not live long enough to have.
Sir.
And so we have to begin to have those real conversations about how is the church doing? Am I effective? And then once you have those real conversations, then you kind of know how to move. And it shouldn't be the point where people's feelings get hurt. I mean, it's a reality. If you've played sports, we look at these people who are playing in the NFL. They can't play in the NFL 30 years. You can't do that. At some point, you're no longer effective. And so you have to know when you reach that point, you've reached your limit on being effective. And the last thing I'll say is, Darrick, you mentioned in Exodus 18, where Jethro told Moses that you're going to kill yourself. Well, that's the system that the AME church uses. What we have, what's called the class leader system. And so other places call it small groups and things like that. But that is the biblical gist behind that concept, because he told him, I want you to break it down. I need you to take a leader from each one of those tribes, and then the people are to take their problems to that leader, and then that leader is to bring those problems to you to be able to help deal with that. And so when you take that class leader system, that's what's supposed to be able to help. And essentially those leaders should serve as mini pastors. So that, what does that mean? That means that when the head or the executive or the senior pastor goes out, another one can come in, but that church ought to be able to continue to function because those leaders are still there. Those leaders are still in place to be able to keep that church functioning and moving. And I'll just say this in closing, that this is not, we don't have the opportunity to do that succession planning in the AME church as we would see it somewhere else. I hear Dr. Howard John Wesley and Dr. Marcus Cosby talking about it all the time. We don't have the opportunity to do that here, but there are things that we can put in place that would make transition a smooth one. It would allow that next person to be able to come in, and understanding that people develop attachments.
Yes, sir.
We develop attachments. People
Yes,
are
sir.
going to develop attachments. And that's something you're going to have to come in. And so people have to know coming in as well, especially with our system being 1 year at a time, and you can potentially be moved from church to church to church. And every pastor didn't get moved because the people hated them. Sometimes they get moved because they were promoted to something else. And so going in and following those people, you got to know how to honor. And I've heard that throughout tonight. You got to know how to honor the people who were there before you.
Yes, sir.
Don't think that, I don't care how they left, don't think that there may not be someone there who loved that person. And if they feel that you're not honoring when you come in, then you just lost that person. And then that spills over to someone else and someone else and someone else. So this has been a great conversation tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to contribute to it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to that point where our show is about to end. Let me again thank my covenant brothers. You all get a chance to listen to us have conversation in a public sphere, but this is what we talk about every day through text. And when we get together in fellowship, we laugh about a lot of things, talk about a lot of things, but we also are very honest about things as well. And so I want to thank my brothers for being a part of this vision that the Lord has blessed us to be able to operate in. And this conversation is necessary. And I want to say to all of the pastoral leaders, in nowhere are we telling you to do anything outside of what God is telling you to do, but there's also no harm in you having the appropriate conversations in that regard. It's so very, very important that you are thinking about that. If you look at it from a business perspective, businesses go through many things. They go through strategic planning, right? They do 5-year and 10-year vision casting, right? They think about, who are we in 5 years? Who are we in 10 years? What does that look like? And we must be honest in that assessment as well. What does that look like? And making sure that we are having the appropriate conversations and putting things in place. To consider what it looked like, Ash made a really good point. Some of us, we've pastored, and we've married and buried multiple generations of the same family. And we've seen that, right? But we've also seen the example where pastors have well into their 70s and even their 80s, they're still pastoring. And some of them are very effective. God be praised for that. But others is because they can't let go, right? You meet some where they greet you with their title, not with their government name, right? Because they're so used to being called by that title, and to where it hurts them not to be called that way. I work in politics. You see politicians who are trying to run for office well after their advanced ages because their entire identity was based on having that title and that position. So the thought of letting another generation come in after them is not on their mind, right? Think about it from DC. All of the strong leaders or the powerful leaders in DC and Congress and in the Senate are well in their late 70s and 80s, right? They won't let go because there's a power they have acquired as they've sat there for so long. So we want to be careful that we don't create our own little kingdom. And now our little kingdom is competing with the kingdom of God because we've taken people away from leading them to Jesus, and now they are worshiping us. And so in no way are we telling you to resign your church tomorrow. At the same point, we are encouraging you to think about, what does life look like after I am no longer in the pulpit every single Sunday, right? There are things that I desire to do. My wife and I are blessed. In 4 years, our life's going to look a whole lot different, right? I'll hit 50. Our son will graduate from college, daughter will graduate from high school, right? So we're having a conversation about empty nesting, right? At 50 and whatever her age is going to be. I'm not going to tell y'all her age. Y'all being nosy. But we're thinking about that. What does that look like, right? Jay and Frida, Ash and Sean, right? As grandparents, right? Looking at the world a whole lot different what that looks like. And so our point of tonight's discussion is there's no harm in considering it and having conversations about it and putting things in place so that the people that you've loved and people that you have pastored, you can do right by them, and prayerfully they'll do right by you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Pastor Darrick McGhee. I pastor Bible-based church in Tallahassee, Florida. God has blessed me to be pastoring there for 14 years from its inception, and I'm grateful to God. This is Pastor Dr. Bernard E. Hudson of the Arnett Chapel AME Church in Quincy, Florida. Pastor Julius R. Harris of the New Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church in Havana, Florida. Pastor Roosevelt N. Rogers III of the Old Jerusalem Missionary Baptist Church in Havana, Florida. And then Pastor Richard Ash II of the Net Church of God in Christ in Quincy, Florida. We are the Covenant Brothers. We pray God's blessings be upon each one of you. Thank you for being a part of our conversation tonight. We encourage you to share this with any and all persons that you may know. This conversation will not die out. So we would hope that you would be willing to share with those that you may know and encourage them to have those conversations. Thank you once again for being a part of our show. We love you all with the love of Jesus Christ. We're grateful that God has blessed us to be a part of this. We're the Covenant Brothers. Thank you for being a part of our discussion tonight. May God bless you and forever keep you is our earnest prayer. Bless you all.